On his wife's birthday, he kissed her friend and proposed. Thinking she was innocent and weak, she shattered his world. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I want to take a moment, not just to welcome you, but to wrap you in all the love and honor I carry in my heart for you. You are not just part of this journey. You are the heartbeat of it. Every single one of you is a blessing I will never stop cherishing. Your presence, your support, your quiet prayers, your kindness, I feel it all and I carry it with me like a treasure. You are my light on the darkest days, my strength when I feel weak, my joy in the quiet hours. I hold you with the same tenderness a mother holds her child, with the same reverence a soul holds sacred ground. I respect you, I honor you, and I love you. More than words, more than stories, more than time itself. If ever I've failed you, I ask your forgiveness. If ever my silence made you feel forgotten, please know you live in my prayers, always. You are not just my audience, you are my family, my forever. Before we begin today's story, please receive this deeply beautiful prayer from my soul to yours. May every wound in your heart be gently healed by grace. May your nights be free of worry and your mornings full of quiet joy. May love find you in unexpected ways, and may angels walk beside you, whispering hope when you feel low. May your children be safe, your dreams protected, and your heart reminded daily that you are deeply, eternally loved. May you rise always surrounded by peace, strength, and the warmth of God's love. And now, my dearest family, let us begin with nothing but love. The autumn leaves scattered across the university campus as Glenn Sutherland leaned against his sleek black Audi, sunglasses perched on his chiseled face despite the cloudy October sky. At 23, he was already legendary throughout Westlake University, son of real estate mogul Richard Sutherland, devastatingly handsome and completely aware of both facts. "Hey, Glenn," called a blonde in a tight sweater, deliberately slowing her pace. "Great party last weekend." Glenn flashed his trademark smile, the one that had launched 1,000 hookups. "Next weekend will be better. You should come." His invitation carried the weight of suggestion, and the blonde blushed, recognizing the familiar pattern that had played out with countless women before her. This was Glenn's final year at Westlake, and he'd spent the previous 3 building a reputation that preceded him into every room. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. He maintained a solid B average with minimal effort, enough to satisfy his father, who measured success in real estate acquisitions rather than GPAs. Glenn's true education had been in seduction and social dynamics, subjects in which he'd earned an unofficial doctorate. Sutherland, a fraternity brother, jogged over, slapping Glenn's shoulder. "Economic study group still on for tonight?" Glenn grinned. "Depends. Is Melissa still hosting?" "Yeah, and she specifically asked if you were coming." "Then I'm there." Glenn checked his watch, an unnecessarily expensive timepiece that had been his father's graduation gift. "I've got business ethics now. The old man insists I take it. Something about corporate responsibility." He rolled his eyes dramatically and both men laughed. The lecture hall was already packed when Glenn strolled in, deliberately 7 minutes late, enough to make an entrance, not enough to genuinely irritate Professor Winters. He spotted a seat in the middle row and headed for it, nodding to familiar faces, ignoring the hopeful smiles from women he'd already conquered and discarded. "This seat is taken," came a cool voice as he reached for the chair. Glenn blinked, startled by the refusal. Looking down, he met the steady gaze of a woman he didn't recognize, dark skin that seemed to glow in the auditorium's fluorescent lighting. Curly hair pulled back in a messy bun with escaping tendrils, framing a face that made his practiced smile falter. "There's no one sitting here," he pointed out, gesturing to the empty chair. "Yes, there is. My focus, my attention, my desire to..." Actually learn something. She turned pointedly away, opening her notebook to a fresh page. There are plenty of seats by people who want to smell your cologne for the next hour. A ripple of whispers and suppressed laughter spread through nearby rows. Glenn felt heat rise in his neck, not from embarrassment, but from the foreign sensation of being challenged. He opened his mouth for a cutting retort, but Professor Winters chose that moment to begin the lecture. Retreating to a seat 2 rows back, Glenn found himself distracted, his attention repeatedly drawn to the back of the woman's head. Who was she to dismiss Glenn Sutherland? By lecture's end, his curiosity had transformed into determination. He maneuvered through departing students to intercept her at the door. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, blocking her path with casual confidence. Glenn Sutherland. He extended his hand, expecting the usual flutter of recognition, the shifting demeanor that occurred when women realized who he was. She regarded his hand like it was a moderately interesting museum exhibit before meeting his eyes directly. "Mercy Christian, and I know exactly who you are. Then you have the advantage," he replied, lowering his hand but maintaining his smile, "because clearly I've been missing out." "Missing classes, maybe. This is week 5. She stepped around him, heading toward the exit. "Your reputation precedes you, Glenn. The campus Casanova with the real estate empire waiting after graduation." He fell into step beside her. "If you know so much about me, maybe we should discuss it over coffee." Mercy stopped, turning to face him fully. For the first time, Glenn noticed her eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, intelligent and completely unimpressed. "Why? So I can become another conquest story for your fraternity brothers. Hey guys, guess who I finally got? The black girl from ethics class." Her tone was light but edged with steel. Glenn's practiced charm faltered. "That's not, it is," she interrupted. "And I'm not interested in being anybody's novelty, experience, or redemption story." She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I have actual goals that don't include becoming a footnote in your college hookup history." Before he could respond, a tall young man approached, smiling warmly at Mercy. "Ready for study group?" "Absolutely," she replied, her expression softening as she turned away from Glenn. The economic impact of climate change, right? They walked away together, leaving Glenn standing alone, a novel sensation that settled uncomfortably on his shoulders. He watched her leave, the sway of her walk confident and unhurried. For the first time in years, Glenn felt the unfamiliar sting of rejection, and even more surprisingly, the sharp bite of genuine interest. The fraternity house was pulsing with music that night, red cups and bodies everywhere as Glenn mechanically moved through the motions of his usual Friday. He poured drinks, told stories that made people laugh, accepted admiring touches from women whose names blurred together. But something felt off, the thrill of the game suddenly hollow. "Dude, Caitlin is practically throwing herself at you," his roommate Derek muttered, nodding toward a redhead, making deliberate eye contact from across the room. "What's your problem tonight?" Glenn shrugged, taking another swig of beer. "Just thinking about that business ethics project." "Since when do you think about classwork at parties?" Derek looked genuinely concerned. "Are you sick?" "Who's that girl?" "Mercy Christian. Do you know her?" Derek's eyebrows shot up. "The scholarship brainiac? Why?" "Just curious. She blew me off today." His friend burst into laughter. "Holy shit! Somebody actually turned down the great Glenn Sutherland? This I gotta hear." "She's different," Glenn mused, ignoring the teasing. "Not playing the game." "That's because she's not playing any games. Word is she's on some super selective academic track. Full scholarship, already accepted to Columbia Law for next year. She tutors at the Academic Success Center to make extra cash." Derek shook his head. "Seriously, man, plenty of willing fish in this pond without chasing one swimming upstream." But as the night wore on, Glenn found himself distracted, the usual. party scene suddenly tedious and predictable. He kept thinking about those amber-flecked eyes, the complete absence of the flutter and smile he'd come to expect from women. The following Monday, he arrived at business ethics early, a possibly unprecedented event, and watched the door until Mercy entered. She wore simple jeans and a university sweatshirt, her hair in the same practical bun, carrying a travel mug of what smelled like strong coffee. She noticed him immediately, but gave no reaction beyond the slightest narrowing of her eyes before. Taking a seat in the front row, Glenn slid into the empty chair beside her, ignoring her raised eyebrow. "Good morning," he said simply. "Is it?" she replied, pulling out her notebook. "I looked up your environmental economics paper in the university journal," he said, watching with satisfaction as surprise flickered across her face. "The analysis of sustainable development incentives was impressive." Mercy's expression shifted to suspicion. "Did you actually read it, or just the abstract?" "Both," Glenn answered honestly. "I also read the response from Professor Harlow. His counterpoints about market-based solutions seemed weaker than your original argument." For the first time, Mercy's composure slipped, revealing genuine surprise. "You actually read 28 pages of economic theory?" "I did. Turns out I can read things that don't have pictures," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Your writing is remarkably accessible for such complex material." Before she could respond, Professor Winters began the lecture. As class ended 90 minutes later, Mercy packed her bag deliberately, finally looking at Glenn with a measured gaze. "Why are you really here, Glenn? Because if this is some elaborate new strategy, I should warn you it's a waste of both our time." "What if I told you I found our conversation interesting and wanted to continue it?" he asked, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I'd say that's statistically improbable given your historical patterns," she replied, but a hint of a smile played at the corner of her mouth. "But I suppose outliers exist in every data set." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a dismissal either. As Glenn watched her walk away, he felt something unfamiliar stir within him, not just the thrill of the chase, but genuine intrigue about the mind behind those penetrating eyes. For the first time in years, Glenn Sutherland found himself pursuing a woman not as a conquest, but as a puzzle he genuinely wanted to solve. Chapter 2. Breaking Through. The Academic Success Center hummed with the quiet intensity of midterm season. Students huddled over textbooks and laptops with the desperate focus of the academically drowning. Glenn Sutherland stood in the doorway, feeling oddly out of place. Despite having been on campus for nearly 4 years, he'd never actually set foot in this building before. His academic struggles had always been solved through charm, connections, or simply accepting the bare minimum passing grade. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "Can I help you?" The student worker at the front desk looked up, her expression shifting from professional to interested as she recognized him. "I signed up for economics tutoring at 4, Glenn replied, deliberately avoiding his usual flirtatious smile. "I'm supposed to meet with—" He pretended to check his phone. "Mercy Christian." "Oh, yes, she's at table 7 in the back." The girl pointed, her fingers lingering in the air a moment too long. "Just so you know, she's our toughest tutor. No nonsense." "Perfect," Glenn murmured, making his way through the maze of tables. He spotted. Mercy immediately bent over a textbook, making notes with quick, precise movements of her pen. Her hair was arranged in the same practical bun, but today tendrils had escaped to frame her face, catching the afternoon light from the tall windows. She wore a simple navy sweater that somehow made her skin glow warmer. Glenn took a steadying breath, reminding himself why he was here. It had taken considerable effort to arrange this meeting, deliberately bombing his microeconomics quiz, requesting a specific tutor, even rescheduling a standing racquetball game with his father's business partner. all to sit across from a woman who had made it abundantly clear she wanted nothing to do with him. "You're late," Mercy said without looking up as he approached. Glenn checked his watch. "It's 4:02, and tutoring sessions begin at 4. She finally glanced up, her expression shifting from professional annoyance to genuine surprise. "You? Me?" Glenn confirmed, taking the seat across from her. "Apparently I'm failing microeconomics." Mercy's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're in Adamson's section, right? You had a B+ at midterm." Glenn blinked, momentarily thrown. "How would you know that?" "I grade for Professor Adamson." She folded her arms across her chest. "So what exactly are you doing here, Glenn?" "Because it's certainly not academic desperation." Caught, Glenn abandoned his prepared story. "Fine. I wanted to talk to you." "So you manipulated the tutoring system, potentially taking time away from students who actually need help?" Her voice remained low but took on a razor's edge. "I did the homework," Glenn said quickly, pulling out his economics textbook and a messily annotated problem set. "I didn't come empty-handed." Mercy studied him for a long moment, her amber-flecked eyes unreadable. Finally, she sighed. 45 minutes. That's what you signed up for, that's what you get, and we're actually going to work on economics." For the next half hour, Mercy was relentlessly professional, guiding him through supply-demand equilibrium problems with brisk efficiency. Glenn found himself genuinely engaged, surprised by how clearly she explained concepts that had always seemed unnecessarily complex in lecture. "You're actually really good at this," he said during a pause as she reviewed his work. "Tutoring? Explaining complex ideas, making economics interesting." He leaned forward slightly. "Have you thought about teaching instead of law?" Something flickered across her face, surprised perhaps that he remembered her career plans from their brief conversation a week ago. "I need to change systems, not just explain them. Teaching is valuable, but law gives me tools to address structural inequalities. Like the ones you wrote about in your paper," Glenn nodded. "The economic barriers to sustainable development in underserved communities." Mercy set down her pen. "Why are you really here? And don't say economics." Glenn met her gaze directly. "I'm here because you're the first person in years who didn't immediately fit into my understanding of the world. You dismissed me without a second thought. So this is about your ego," she concluded. "Initially, maybe," he admitted with surprising honesty. "But then I read your paper. I've been thinking about your argument regarding incentive structures and how they perpetuate inequality. It's made me look at my father's development projects differently." Mercy's carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked slightly. "You've actually been thinking about economic policy?" Shocking, I know. The campus playboy has thoughts beyond his next conquest. The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. "That's the reputation you've carefully cultivated," she pointed out. "You can hardly blame people for believing it." Their session ended before Glenn could respond, another student hovering awkwardly nearby for the next appointment. As they packed up their materials, Glenn took a chance. "There's a lecture on environmental economics next Thursday evening. The speaker is from the World Bank." He pushed a flyer across the table. "I thought you might be interested." Mercy glanced at the paper without touching it. "I'm already planning to attend." "Great," Glenn said, trying not to sound too eager. "Maybe we could discuss it afterward. Coffee or something?" "Why?" The directness of her question caught him off. "God!" "Because I'd like to hear your perspective," he answered honestly. Mercy studied him for a long moment, as if trying to detect the lie or hidden agenda in his words. Finally, she picked up the flyer. "I'll think about it." Glenn counted it as progress. The lecture hall was packed the following Thursday, but Glenn spotted Mercy easily, sitting near the front with perfect posture, her notebook already open. He slipped into the empty seat beside her, just as the lights dimmed. "Is this seat taken?" he whispered, a callback to their first meeting. The corner of her mouth twitched. "Only by your questionable motives." For the next hour, they sat in companionable silence as the speaker discussed market-based approaches to environmental challenges. Glenn found himself taking actual notes, partly because the material was surprisingly interesting, and partly because he kept glancing at Mercy's rapid, organized note-taking with something like admiration. As the lecture ended and the lights came up, Glenn waited, unsure if she would honor their tentative coffee agreement. To his surprise, Mercy closed her notebook and turned to him. "That was interesting," she said. "His approach to carbon pricing was more nuanced than I expected." "I liked the case study on renewable energy incentives," Glenn offered, "but it seemed optimistic about voluntary corporate participation." Mercy gave him an appraising look. "Coffee?" They walked across campus to a small cafe tucked behind the Humanities building. Not one of the trendy spots where Glenn usually held court, but a quieter place with mismatched furniture and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. "I have a confession," Glenn said as they settled at a corner table with their drinks. "I've passed this place 100 times and never come in. Too lowbrow for the Sutherland air?" There was a teasing quality to her voice he hadn't heard before. "Too unknown," he corrected. "I tend to stick with the familiar." Except when pursuing unfamiliar tutoring sessions," she countered, but a smile softened the words. Their conversation flowed more easily than Glenn had expected, moving from environmental economics to campus politics to their vastly different upbringings. He learned that Mercy was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support them, that she'd won her first debate competition at 12, that she made extra money proofreading dissertations for international graduate students. "My mother always said education was the one thing nobody could take away from you," Mercy explained, warming her hands around her mug. "Every birthday, every Christmas, books were the main gift, even when money was tight. My father's philosophy is that everything has a price and everyone has an angle," Glenn found himself saying. "Success is measured by who blinks first in a negotiation." "And what's your philosophy?" Mercy asked quietly. The question caught Glenn off guard. No one had ever asked about his personal beliefs, separate from his father's or his fraternity's. Culture. He stared into his coffee, suddenly aware of the fragile moment between them. "I'm not sure I have one yet," he admitted finally. "I've been following a script for so long, I'm not sure what parts are actually me and what's just expected." The vulnerability in his answer seemed to shift something between them. Mercy's expression softened, her academic armor lowering slightly. "At least you're self-aware enough to recognize that," she said. "Most people never question the scripts they're given. They talked until the cafe began closing around them, the staff politely stacking chairs on tables." Outside, the November air had turned sharp with the promise of winter, and Mercy pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I can drive you home," Glenn offered, gesturing toward the parking lot where his Audi waited. "I'm in Westridge Apartments," she said. "It's not far." "That's across campus," he pointed out. "It's nearly midnight and it's freezing." Mercy hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." The drive was quiet, but comfortably so. Glenn resisted the urge to fill the silence with his usual charm offensive, instead letting the soft jazz from his car speakers create a peaceful bubble around them. When they arrived at her apartment complex, notably more modest than his downtown luxury building, he turned off the engine. "I'll walk you up," he said, reaching for his door handle. "That's not necessary," Mercy replied quickly. "It's late. Humor me." She looked like she might argue, then simply nodded. They walked side by side to her building, stopping at the entrance. A security light cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheekbone, the fullness of her lips. "Thank you for tonight," Glenn said quietly, "for giving me a chance to be more than my reputation." Mercy studied him, her expression thoughtful. "You're different than I expected," she admitted, "though I'm still not entirely sure what you want from me." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. In any other situation, with any other woman, Glenn would have moved in for a kiss, but something told him that would shatter whatever delicate connection they'd begun to build. "I want to keep talking to you," he said simply. "I want to hear what you think about things. I want to figure out what I actually think about things." A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed her face. "That's surprisingly honest." "I'm full of surprises," Glenn replied with a smile of his own. Mercy took a step toward her door, then paused. "The Environmental Law Society is hosting a debate next Tuesday evening. You might find it interesting." The invitation was casual, but significant. "I'll be there," Glenn promised. As he drove home, Glenn realized two unprecedented things had happened. He'd spent an entire evening with a beautiful woman without once attempting to charm his way into her bed. And more surprisingly, he was already looking forward to seeing her again, not as a conquest, but as someone whose mind and perspective had genuinely captured his interest. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Glenn Sutherland went to bed thinking about a woman's words rather than her body, and found himself strangely, unexpectedly content with that reality. Chapter 3. The Transformation. The winter formal at Westlake University was traditionally the most prestigious event of the fall semester. Glenn arrived fashionably late, but for once, his tardiness wasn't calculated. He'd spent an extra 30 minutes debating tie choices and checking his hair, unusual behavior that had prompted merciless teasing from his roommate. The grand ballroom glittered with lights and the sparkle of expensive dresses. Glenn scanned the room with singular purpose until he found Mercy near the punch bowl, wearing a burgundy dress that hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. She'd worn her hair down for once, dark curls cascading past her shoulders. Glenn paused, momentarily transfixed. In the month since their coffee shop conversation, they'd fallen into a pattern of debate attendance, study sessions, and increasingly personal conversations. "You came," he said, approaching her with a genuine smile. "I said I would." Mercy turned, her eyes widening slightly as she took in his tailored suit. "You clean up well, Sutherland." "As do you, Christian." He offered her a glass of punch, though I think stunning would be more accurate. She accepted the drink with a skeptical eyebrow raise. "Is the flattery really necessary?" "It's not flattery if it's true," Glenn replied simply. A slow song began, and Glenn extended his hand. "Dance with me?" Mercy hesitated, glancing around at the curious onlookers before placing her hand in his. "One dance." On the dance floor, Glenn maintained a respectful distance, though his hand at the small of her back felt like it belonged there. They moved together with surprising synchronicity. "Everyone's staring," Mercy murmured, tension evident in her shoulders. "Let them," Glenn replied, "though I can't blame them. You're easily the most beautiful woman here." "There you go again with the lines." Glenn guided her through a gentle turn. "Not a line, just truth." He paused, then added more softly, "You know, a month ago, I would have had 3 drinks by now and be working my way through the cheerleading squad." "And now?" Mercy asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Now, I'm exactly where I want to be." The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Her expression softened, and for the first time, Glenn saw her fully relax in his presence. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier dissolving as they continued to dance, their bodies moving closer without conscious thought. One dance became 3, their conversation flowing easily. When they finally left the dance floor, Glenn kept his hand lightly on her back, guiding her to a quiet corner. "This isn't just some new strategy, is it, Glenn?" Mercy asked, her expression serious. "The intellectual discussions, the debates, this dance. I'm not just a different kind of challenge." Glenn took her hand, his expression solemn. Mercy, before I met you, I was sleepwalking through life, following the path of least resistance. You woke me up." He squeezed her fingers gently. "This isn't strategy. This is the first real thing I've felt in years." Their eyes locked, the moment stretching between them with electric potential. Glenn leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Mercy moved to meet him, their lips connecting in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with surprising intensity. Her hands slid up to his chest, while his cupped her face with unexpected tenderness. When they finally broke apart, Glenn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since our third tutoring session," he admitted. "Only the third," Mercy teased, her breathing slightly uneven. "Well, the second actually, but that seemed too predictable." From that night forward, the campus couldn't stop talking about the unlikely couple. The notorious Glenn Sutherland, seen carrying Mercy's books to class, waiting for her outside the library, turning down party invitations to study with her for finals. His fraternity brothers made bets on how long it would last. Winter break at the latest, Derek predicted over lunch. "Once you're away from campus for a month, you'll be back to your old ways." But winter break only strengthened their connection. Glenn surprised everyone by skipping the annual Sutherland family ski trip to Switzerland, instead spending most of the break driving to Mercy's modest hometown, meeting her mother and discovering the simple pleasure of movie nights on a worn couch with homemade cookies instead of VIP bottle service. When spring semester began, the betting pool about their relationship's expiration date had to be extended. Glenn turned down the legendary spring break Cancun trip, a fraternity tradition he'd helped establish as a freshman, to help Mercy prepare for her law school admission test. Their physical connection intensified as their emotional bond deepened. One evening in an empty classroom, a debate about market regulations turned into a heated kiss that left Mercy pressed against the whiteboard. Glenn's hands tangled in her hair as she wrapped her legs around his waist. Their passion frequently surprised them both with its intensity. Stolen moments in library stacks, breathless encounters in Glenn's apartment that left them tangled in sheets and textbooks. But Glenn found himself equally captivated by Mercy's mind. He discovered a genuine interest in subjects he'd previously dismissed, engaging in late-night philosophical discussions and actually caring about his academic performance for perhaps the first time. The defining moment of his transformation came during midterms week when Mercy collapsed with a dangerous fever. Glenn not only stayed by her side in the campus health center, but collected her assignments, communicated with her professors, and completed her half-finished term paper on comparative economic systems, revealing an academic ability he'd long hidden beneath his party boy persona. When Professor Richards questioned whether Glenn had actually written the paper himself, he simply handed over his preliminary research notes, complete with margin annotations that connected economic theory to examples from his father's business practices, demonstrating a depth of understanding that left the skeptical professor speechless. By graduation day, Glenn and Mercy had become Westlake University's most unlikely success story. As they stood together in their caps and gowns, Glenn's father approached them, eyeing Mercy with the calculating gaze of a man who assessed everything in terms of value. "So you're the one who's reformed my son," Richard Sutherland said, extending his hand. "He's turned down 3 perfectly good VP positions in the company to follow you to Columbia." "With all due respect, sir," Mercy replied, her grip firm, "Glenn hasn't been reformed. He simply revealed who he actually is when he stops performing for everyone else's expectations." Richard's eyebrows rose, but a reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "Well said." He turned to his son. "She's certainly not what I expected. I approve." As his father walked away, Glenn pulled Mercy close. "I love you," he said simply, the words still new enough to feel momentous. "I love you too," she replied. "Even though you've completely destroyed your carefully crafted reputation, Glenn laughed, looking around at the campus that had witnessed his remarkable transformation. "Best thing I ever did," he said before kissing her soundly, unconcerned with who might be watching. The old Glenn Sutherland, campus playboy, existed only in fading memories and graduation anecdotes. In his place stood a man discovering what it meant to truly love someone more than himself. Chapter 4. Building a Life. The Manhattan apartment was modest by Sutherland standards, a one-bedroom in Washington Heights rather than the luxury Tribeca loft Glenn's father had offered. But it was theirs, filled with mismatched furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and the warm scent of Mercy's mother's special occasion, cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. "Happy anniversary," Mercy said, setting a slightly lopsided homemade cake on their small dining table. 2 candles flickered in the center, marking 2 years since their first kiss at the winter formal, and 6 months since Glenn had slipped a vintage emerald ring on her finger in a quiet proposal on the steps of the library where they'd first studied together. "Happy anniversary," Glenn echoed, pulling her into his arms. "Though I think I got the better end of this deal." Mercy laughed, the sound vibrating against his chest. "How do you figure that?" "Well, you got a reformed playboy with daddy issues and a trust fund. I got the future Supreme Court Justice with the most brilliant mind and gorgeous eyes I've ever seen." "No takebacks," he murmured against her lips. "You're stuck with me now." Mrs. Soon-to-be Sutherland, their life together, had settled into a rhythm neither could have imagined during their university days. While Mercy excelled in her second year at Columbia Law, Glenn had surprised everyone, especially his father, by enrolling in a master's program in urban planning rather than stepping directly into the family business. His thesis focused on sustainable development models for underserved communities, inspired by Mercy's passionate advocacy. "I got you something," Glenn said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but..." "Hold that thought," Mercy interrupted, fishing her phone from her pocket as it vibrated insistently. Her expression shifted as she checked the screen. "It's Professor Hadley, about the clerkship application." Glenn immediately stepped back, giving her space. "Take it." He watched as Mercy answered, her face carefully composed in the professional mask she wore for academic and career matters, but he knew her tells. The slight widening of her eyes, the way she tucked a curl behind her ear 3 times as she listened. "Yes, sir. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll submit the additional materials by Friday." She ended the call, standing absolutely still for 3 heartbeats before her composure cracked. "I got it. The summer clerkship with Justice Williams," Glenn whooped, lifting her off her feet. "I knew it. What did I tell you? The most brilliant mind in the law school." "It's just a summer position," Mercy cautioned, but her eyes shone with undisguised excitement. "But working directly with Justice Williams, Glenn, this is huge for my career." "This calls for champagne," Glenn declared, retrieving the bottle he'd splurged on despite their tight student budget. As he popped the cork, Mercy wrapped her arms around him from behind, her lips finding the sensitive spot below his ear. "You know what else this calls for?" she murmured, her hands slipping beneath his shirt. Glenn turned, capturing her mouth in a kiss that quickly escalated from celebratory to hungry. The champagne forgotten, he lifted her onto the kitchen counter, stepping between her legs as her ankles locked behind him. Later, curled together on the couch with champagne finally poured, Mercy made a quick call to her mother, her voice animated as she shared the news. The pride Glenn felt watching her achieve her dreams continued to surprise him. How her successes filled him with a joy as potent as any he'd felt for his own accomplishments. That evening, tangled together in their bed, Glenn traced lazy patterns on Mercy's bare shoulder. "I was thinking," he began carefully, "maybe we should bump up the wedding date before your clerkship starts." Mercy propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly alert. That's only 4 months away. I thought we agreed on December. I know, Glenn brushed a curl from her forehead. But I don't want to wait, and frankly, a winter wedding would conflict with your study schedule for finals. Mercy studied him for a long moment. Whatever she found there made her smile. You really have changed, Glenn Sutherland, only because you saw who I could be when no one else did, he replied, pulling her closer, including me. The wedding was held in May, a simple ceremony in the botanical garden where they'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. Glenn's parents had pushed for something grander, but for once, Glenn held firm against his father's expectations. This day is about Mercy and me, he'd said during a tense family dinner. Not about impressing your business associates. To everyone's surprise, it was Glenn's mother who had finally supported their decision. It's their day, Richard, she'd said, with unusual firmness. And frankly, I think Glenn's finally found someone worth building a life with, not just a suitable social match. The ceremony itself was intimate, but beautiful. Mercy wore a simple white gown that made Glenn's breath catch when she appeared at the end of the garden path. Her mother, elegant in blue, walked her down the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down her face. I promise to challenge you, support you, and grow with you, Glenn vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion tightening his throat. To be your partner in every sense of the word, and to show you every day that loving you is the wisest decision I've ever made. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Glenn didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He pulled Mercy into an embrace that communicated everything words couldn't: devotion, desire, and profound gratitude. Their first year of marriage coincided with Mercy's final year of law school and Glenn's entry into Sutherland Developments as a junior executive focused on community-integrated projects. They moved to a slightly larger apartment in Brooklyn, creating a home that blended their sensibilities. Glenn's appreciation for clean, modern lines, softened by Mercy's collection of second-hand books and colorful textiles. The transition wasn't always smooth. Glenn's father remained skeptical of his son's social justice phase, while Mercy struggled with the demanding schedule of her final year and bar exam preparation. They argued sometimes, Glenn's instinct for grand gestures occasionally clashing with Mercy's practical nature, Mercy's intense focus during exam periods, leaving Glenn feeling temporarily sidelined. But they always found their way back to each other, their reconciliations as passionate as their disputes. They kept their promise of complete honesty, maintaining open communication that prevented small frustrations from festering into larger resentments. The night Mercy received her bar exam results, Glenn arranged a surprise gathering of their closest friends at their apartment. As she opened the email confirming her passing score, confetti showered down and champagne corks popped. I knew you could do it, Glenn whispered against her hair as he held her. Never doubted for a second. Later, after their friends had gone, Glenn presented her with a small wrapped box. Inside lay a delicate gold pendant shaped like the scales of justice. Turn it over, he urged. Engraved on the back were the words, "To my brilliant wife who taught me what justice really means." Mercy's eyes filled with tears as Glenn fastened the necklace around her throat. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said quietly. "Yes, you would," Glenn corrected her, tilting her chin up. "That's what I love most about you, Mercy. You would have achieved everything you have with or without me. I'm just incredibly grateful I get to witness it up close." As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Glenn traced the curve of her spine, marveling at how this remarkable woman had chosen him, had seen potential in him that he hadn't recognized in himself. The notorious playboy, who had once measured his worth by conquests, had discovered something far more satisfying: the deep contentment of loving one woman completely, of building something lasting rather than chasing the next fleeting thrill. What neither of them could have anticipated was how the strength of their bond would soon be tested by the arrival of someone who would threaten everything they had so carefully built together. Chapter 5. Deepening Bonds. The Sutherlands' brownstone in Park Slope, a wedding anniversary gift from Glenn's parents that he had initially resisted but Mercy had pragmatically accepted, had transformed from an elegant showpiece into a true home. Photographs chronicling their journey lined the hallway walls, while shelves displayed souvenirs from weekend getaways and international trips they'd taken together. "You're going to be late," Mercy called from the kitchen, where she was simultaneously reviewing case notes and preparing coffee. Glenn emerged from the bedroom adjusting his tie, a concession to his father's expectations for monthly family business. "Brunches. Remind me again why I agreed to this." "Because," Mercy replied, rising to fix his slightly crooked tie, "you're brilliant at what you do. And even your father has finally admitted that your community-centered development approach is working." Her fingers lingered at his collar. "And because you promised your mother you'd help keep the peace between your father and brother." Glenn caught her hands, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Voice of reason, as always." He pulled her closer, his hand sliding down to her hips. "Though I can think of much better ways to spend a Sunday morning, their easy domesticity hadn't dampened the spark between them." Glenn still looked at Mercy with the same wonder as when they'd first met, though now his admiration had deepened with the knowledge of all she had accomplished. Since passing the bar, Mercy had established herself at Crawford, Bennett and Williams, a prestigious law firm specializing in human rights and corporate ethics. Her work often brought her into direct conflict with powerful business interests, including occasionally her father-in-law's associates. But she navigated these potential landmines with diplomatic skill that earned her respect, even from adversaries. Glenn, meanwhile, had surprised the entire New York real estate community by transforming a division of Sutherland Developments into an innovative force for ethical urban renewal. His mixed-income housing projects and community-based commercial developments had won industry awards and, more importantly to him, measurably improved the neighborhoods where they were located. Their partnership extended beyond their personal relationship into a professional alliance that had become formidable in New York circles. Yet behind closed doors, away from their professional personas, they maintained a passionate connection that continued to surprise them both with its intensity, like the previous Tuesday when Glenn had returned from a contentious board meeting to find Mercy in the shower. Without a word, he had stripped and joined her, pressing her against the cool tile as steaming water cascaded over them. Or the night Mercy had won a particularly difficult case, arriving home to find Glenn waiting with champagne and a wicked gleam in his eye that led to an impromptu celebration on the kitchen counter. That evening, as they prepared for the Carter Foundation dinner, Glenn watched Mercy zip into the simple but elegant black dress that highlighted her curves. The sight of her, confident, brilliant, and undeniably sexy, still affected him physically in a way that made black tie events particularly challenging. "What?" Mercy asked, catching his reflection in the mirror. "Just appreciating the view," Glenn replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His lips found the bare skin of her shoulder. "Have I mentioned lately how lucky I am?" Mercy laughed, leaning back against him. "Only every day." She turned in his arms, her eyes darkening as she felt his response to her proximity. "We have 40 minutes before the car arrives." "I only need 20, Glenn murmured against her neck. "Confident, aren't we?" Mercy teased, even as her hands worked at his belt. They arrived at the gala exactly on time, both slightly flushed but impeccably dressed, sharing secret smiles throughout the evening. As they danced to the live band, Glenn chuckled, sharing an overheard comment about them being disgustingly perfect. "Apparently we're abnormal for not hating each other yet," he said. Mercy's eyes sparkled as she looked up at him. "Well, you," are still incredibly annoying sometimes. Really? Do tell. You leave wet towels on the bathroom floor. You hog the covers. You insist on making that disgusting protein shake every morning that smells like feet. Glenn laughed. And yet you keep me around. I'm very charitable, Mercy replied with mock seriousness before her expression softened. And you make me laugh, and you've never once asked me to be less ambitious or less driven. And you still look at me like you did at that winter formal. The genuine emotion in her voice touched something deep in Glenn's chest. For all their banter and professional accomplishments, it was these moments of raw honesty that anchored their marriage. They had created traditions uniquely theirs, leaving love notes in unexpected places, competitive date nights where they tried to outdo each other with creativity rather than expense, skinny dipping in the rooftop hot tub Glenn had installed for Mercy's 31st birthday. Their personal rituals formed the foundation of an intimacy that transcended physical attraction, though that element remained potent enough to occasionally scandalize their housekeeper. One such incident occurred when Mrs. Peterson arrived early. To find them in the kitchen, Mercy perched on the island counter with Glenn between her legs, both so absorbed in each other they hadn't heard the front door. The poor woman had retreated in flustered embarrassment, returning an hour later to find them fully dressed and studiously pretending nothing had happened. But perhaps their most meaningful shared activity was their monthly volunteer work at Haven House, a shelter for women and children escaping domestic violence. Glenn taught financial literacy, while Mercy provided legal advice. It had begun as a one-time commitment, but evolved into a regular engagement that they both treasured, particularly as they began serious discussions about starting a family of their own. "I think I'm ready," Mercy said one night as they lay entwined in bed, the city lights casting gentle shadows across their room. "To try for a baby." Glenn propped himself up on one elbow, searching her face. They had discussed children theoretically, but Mercy had always been cautious about timing. "You're sure? What about the partner track?" "I'm ahead of schedule according to Morris," she said, referring to the senior partner who had become her mentor. "And I realized something today, watching you with those kids at Haven House." She paused, her expression soft in the dim light. "We have so much love to give, Glenn. I don't want to wait anymore." The emotion that surged through Glenn made words temporarily impossible. Instead, he gathered her close, pouring everything. He felt into a kiss that quickly rekindled the embers of the passion they'd shared earlier in the evening. This time, their lovemaking was different, slower, more deliberate, with the awareness that they might be creating something new together. Later, as Mercy slept curled against him, Glenn allowed himself to imagine their future, a child with Mercy's intelligent eyes and determined spirit, family holidays filled with laughter, the continuation of the stable, loving home they had created together. It seemed impossible that just 7 years earlier he had been a different man entirely, superficial, restless, incapable of the depth of feeling that now defined his existence. As he drifted towards sleep, Glenn tightened his arm around his wife, profoundly grateful for the life they had built and excited for the next chapter they would write together. Neither of them could have imagined that the foundations of that carefully constructed life were about to be tested by the arrival of someone who would threaten everything they had created. Chapter 6. Enter Lucy. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as Mercy prepared for court, her coffee cooling beside her laptop as she reviewed her opening statement. The familiar name in her inbox gave her pause. Lucy Groves, a childhood friend from summer camp who had moved to New Zealand with her family 15 years ago. They had kept in sporadic contact over the years, liking each other's posts on social media and exchanging occasional holiday wishes. But they hadn't had a real conversation in nearly a decade. "Lucy Groves," Mercy mused aloud, opening the message. I wonder what she's up to. Glenn glanced up from his own laptop across the breakfast bar. Who? Friend from when I was 12. We spent 3 summers at Camp Evergreen together, then she moved to New Zealand. Haven't really kept in touch except for the odd Facebook comment. The email was lengthy, full of warm reminiscences and meticulously detailed updates on Lucy's life, her psychology studies, her travels around Asia, and her recent acceptance to a prestigious graduate program at Columbia. Mercy skimmed through until the final paragraphs caught her attention. I know this is terribly forward after so many years, but I've found myself in a difficult situation. The housing market in New York is impossible, and the university accommodation is full for the semester. I've been searching for a place I can afford, but everything is either dangerously sketchy or completely beyond my budget. I hate to impose, but I remember you mentioning your brownstone in Brooklyn in your Christmas card. I wonder if you might know of any safe, affordable options in your area, or perhaps even consider a short-term boarder while I find my feet. I promise I'm extremely tidy, quiet, and would be eternally grateful. I understand completely if it's too much to ask after all these years. Everything okay? Glenn asked, noticing Mercy's extended silence. Lucy is coming to Columbia for grad school, but doesn't have housing. Mercy looked up, her expression thoughtful. She's asking if we know of any options, maybe even a short-term stay with us. Glenn's eyebrows rose. With us? A childhood friend you haven't seen in 15 years? It does seem a bit forward, Mercy acknowledged. But we do have the guest room that's just collecting dust, and it sounds like she's in a bind. Mercy Christian Sutherland. Eternally solving other people's problems, Glenn said with affectionate exasperation. You know, most people would just send a list of neighborhood rental agencies. Mercy grinned. When have you known me to be most people? Glenn sighed, already recognizing the determined gleam in his wife's eyes. How long are we talking about? Just until she finds a place of her own, Mercy replied, already typing a response. A month, maybe 2 at most. And what do we know about this Lucy person now? People change a lot from summer camp. Mercy pulled up Lucy's social media profile, displaying a smiling woman with wavy blonde hair posing against various international backdrops. Lucy beside the Sydney Opera House, Lucy on a New Zealand hiking trail, Lucy sipping tea in Kyoto. Every photo was meticulously curated. Beautiful locations, perfect lighting, Lucy always positioned to showcase her best angles. She seems nice. Getting her master's in clinical psychology, did her undergrad with honors. Look at all these volunteer photos, teaching English in Cambodia, working with children in Thailand. All very photogenic volunteer work, Glenn noted, with a hint of skepticism that Mercy missed as she scrolled through more images. Oh, here's a mutual friend commenting. Mercy pointed to a comment from their college classmate Elaine. They must have connected through me. Glenn studied the photos over Mercy's shoulder. Lucy Groves was undeniably attractive in a wholesome, sun-kissed way, with a wide smile and clear blue eyes that seemed to radiate sincerity. There was something calculated about her presentation, but he couldn't quite identify what triggered that impression. If you think it's a good idea, I trust your judgment, he said finally. But let's set a clear timeline and expectations. Mercy turned, kissing him quickly. Thank you. It'll just be temporary, and who knows, maybe we'll make a new friend in the process. Lucy's response came within minutes, oddly quick given the time difference with New Zealand, effusively thanking them and providing her travel details. She demurred when Mercy offered to help find a short-term rental, insisting she wouldn't impose on their hospitality for long, though she also mentioned having shipped several large boxes of belongings ahead, suggesting a less temporary mindset than her words implied. 3 weeks later, Glenn found himself at JFK Airport, holding a handwritten sign reading Lucy Groves, as Mercy had been unexpectedly called into an emergency client meeting. He checked his watch. noting that the flight from Auckland had landed 20 minutes ago. Glenn. He looked up to see a woman who matched the social media photos, but somehow seemed more vivid in person. Lucy Groves had the kind of effortless beauty that photographers tried to capture in outdoor clothing catalogs. Fresh-faced, athletic, with a warm smile that reached her clear blue eyes. She wore simple jeans and a fitted white t-shirt that highlighted her tanned skin. Her blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that somehow still looked styled. "You must be Lucy," Glenn replied, extending his hand. "Mercy sends her apologies. Work emergency? No worries at all," Lucy said, her New Zealand accent lilting pleasantly as she bypassed his handshake for a warm hug. "It's incredibly kind of you both to even consider having me stay. I wasn't sure what I'd do otherwise." Glenn noted how she lingered slightly in the embrace. Not inappropriately, but just a moment longer than typical for a first meeting. As he stepped back, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her eyes quickly scanning him from head to toe before returning to their warm welcome, as Glenn helped with her luggage, a single large suitcase and a battered backpack that looked more like carefully cultivated props than well-used travel gear. Lucy kept up a steady stream of grateful commentary about how fortunate she was to have connected with Mercy again. In the car, she asked thoughtful questions about his work, listening with apparent fascination as he explained his approach to community-centered development. "That's brilliant," she said, when he described a recent project that had preserved a historic neighborhood while creating affordable housing. "So few developers think about the human impact of their work. You're quite exceptional, aren't you?" Her eyes held his a beat longer than necessary, her admiration just transparent enough to feel genuine. Glenn found himself unexpectedly flattered by her sincere interest. Most of his friend's eyes glazed over when he discussed zoning regulations and community board negotiations. "I just try to balance business needs with ethical considerations," he said modestly. "Mercy's influence, really." "You two sound like the perfect match," Lucy commented, her tone warm, though something flickered briefly in her eyes. "Mercy always was the smartest girl at camp. I remember being completely intimidated by her." "She has that effect," Glenn agreed with a fond smile. When they arrived at the brownstone, Mercy had already returned home and was preparing dinner. Her face lit up at the sight of her childhood friend, and the two women embraced like no time had passed. "You look exactly the same," Lucy exclaimed, holding Mercy at arm's length, "still gorgeous and put together while the rest of us mere mortals struggle." The compliment was delivered with such seemingly genuine warmth that the subtle comparison went unnoticed. Mercy laughed. "And you're still a dreadful flatterer. Come on, I'll show you the guest room." Over dinner, Lucy regaled them with stories about growing up in New Zealand, her travels through Asia, and her decision to pursue clinical psychology. She asked thoughtful questions about their careers and relationship, listening with apparent fascination to the story of how they met in college. "So you reformed the notorious playboy," she said to Mercy with a teasing smile. "I'm impressed, though I can certainly see the appeal." She glanced at Glenn, the comment light enough to seem innocent but direct enough to acknowledge his attractiveness. "He wasn't that difficult to tame," Mercy replied, squeezing Glenn's hand affectionately. "He just needed someone to see past the facade." Throughout the evening, Lucy positioned herself as simultaneously impressive and vulnerable, describing academic achievements and adventurous travels in one breath, then sharing carefully curated hardships in the next. Her father's health problems, financial setbacks from a roommate who'd left her with unpaid rent, a broken engagement to a man who couldn't handle her ambition. Each story subtly reinforced her image as accomplished yet in need of support, independent yet deserving of assistance. Glenn noticed, too, how Lucy's attention shifted seamlessly between them, engaging Mercy with reminiscences and questions about her legal work, then turning to Glenn with comments that suggested a deep appreciation for his perspective. She remembered details from earlier conversation with unnerving precision, referencing them later to create a sense of connection. Later, after showing Lucy where everything was in the kitchen and bathroom, Mercy collapsed onto their bed with a contented sigh. "That went well, I think. She seems exactly the same, sweet, a bit chatty, but genuinely nice." Glenn nodded, loosening his tie. "She certainly seems grateful for the opportunity, though I'm not sure about the not that difficult to tame comment. I seem to recall considerable resistance to your charms." Mercy laughed, pulling him down for a kiss. "You were putty in my hands," Sutherland admitted. As they settled into bed, Glenn found himself replaying moments from the evening. Lucy's attentiveness, her strategic self-presentation, the way her gaze sometimes lingered on him when Mercy wasn't looking. There was something carefully calibrated about her behavior that triggered the same instincts he'd developed in business negotiations, a sense that he was watching a performance rather than authentic interaction. But as Mercy curled against him, already drifting towards sleep, he dismissed the thought he was probably just being overprotective of their private space, reading too much into normal social behavior from someone navigating a new environment. The first few weeks with Lucy in the house established a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. She was, as promised, tidy and considerate, often preparing elaborate meals as thanks for their hospitality. Her class schedule aligned conveniently with Glenn's workday, making it logical for him to offer her rides to campus since Sutherland Developments was only a few blocks from Columbia. Their morning drives became a pleasant routine, with Lucy asking insightful questions about Glenn's projects and sharing entertaining stories about her psychology classes. She had a gift for storytelling, often leaving Glenn laughing as he dropped her off at the university gates. She wore subtle, expensive perfume he couldn't quite identify, and occasionally brushed against him, reaching for her bag or the car door. Brief contacts that could easily be accidental, but occurred with curious regularity. Lucy seems to be settling in well, Mercy commented one evening as they prepared for bed. I was worried it might feel intrusive having someone in our space, but she's really easy to have around. Glenn agreed. Lucy had slipped into their lives with remarkable ease, always giving them privacy when they needed it, but providing lively conversation over dinner. She showed genuine interest in both their careers, sometimes offering psychological perspectives on Glenn's community development challenges or asking thoughtful questions about Mercy's cases. What neither of them discussed was how Lucy's presence had subtly altered their domestic patterns. The spontaneous kitchen countertop encounters had ceased with a third person in the house. Their lazy Sunday mornings in bed had been curtailed by Lucy's suggestion of breakfast outings to get to know the neighborhood. Even their nightly routine had shifted slightly, both more conscious of their volume, with a guest down the hall. I think we've got ourselves a good house guest, Glenn said, climbing into bed beside his wife. Though I do miss walking around naked. On Sunday mornings, Mercy laughed, curling against him. A small price to pay for our good deed, and don't worry, she mentioned looking at a few apartments next week. But as weeks stretched into months, Lucy's apartment search seemed perpetually hampered by bad luck, places rented before she could view them, unexpected problems discovered during walkthroughs, landlords who suddenly raised the advertised rent. Each setback was recounted with just the right balance of frustration and resilience to evoke sympathy rather than suspicion. I feel terrible imposing on you both for so long, she said one evening, her blue eyes wide with apparent distress. Please tell me honestly if you want me to find a temporary hostel or something. Don't be ridiculous, Mercy replied immediately. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. We enjoy having you here. Glenn nodded in agreement, though a small part of him had begun to miss the private intimacy he and Mercy had always shared. But watching his wife's genuine pleasure in reconnecting with her childhood friend, he kept these thoughts to himself. Lucy's presence was temporary after all, and Mercy had always given so much to others, supporting his career, volunteering, countless hours, nurturing their relationship. The least he could do was share their home with her friend for a while longer. What Glenn didn't notice was how Lucy observed their interactions with careful attention, noting which compliments made Mercy beam, which topics made Glenn animated, which points of tension existed between them, how she catalogued their habits, preferences, and patterns with methodical precision, how her eyes lingered on Glenn when Mercy wasn't looking, assessing and calculating with an intensity at odds with her carefree persona. And neither of them noticed how beneath her warm smiles and thoughtful gestures, Lucy Groves was patiently, systematically working her way into the cracks of their marriage. Hairline fractures so subtle they didn't yet realize they existed. Chapter 7. The First Cracks. 3 months after Lucy's arrival, subtle shifts began to appear in the Sutherland household dynamics. Changes so gradual they might have gone unnoticed had Mercy not been trained to detect patterns and inconsistencies. Through years of legal practice, it started with Glenn's schedule. The man who had prided himself on work-life balance and leaving the office by 6 suddenly found himself caught in unavoidable meetings that stretched well into the evening. When he did arrive home, he seemed distracted, checking his phone, more frequently smiling at messages he claimed were just work stuff. The Harlem redevelopment project was indeed entering a critical phase, with community board approvals and investor concerns creating legitimate demands on his time. But something about the pattern felt off to Mercy's intuitive sense. Lucy, meanwhile, had undergone a subtle transformation in her appearance. The casual, outdoorsy style she'd arrived with had been replaced by more sophisticated and, notably, more revealing outfits. Her yoga pants became increasingly form-fitting, her necklines lower when lounging around the house. She'd taken to wearing her hair down in loose waves that she often tossed or twirled absently while talking. The changes were gradual enough that commenting would have seemed petty, yet the cumulative effect was striking. More subtly, Lucy had begun to insert herself into conversations between Glenn and Mercy, positioning herself as a mediator or interpreter. "What Glenn means is, or I think Mercy's trying to say," she would interject, creating a triangulated dynamic where she became central to their communication. She'd also developed an uncanny habit of appearing whenever Mercy and Glenn began having a private moment, necessitating a shift back to more general conversation. Mercy noticed these changes peripherally at first, dismissing her unease as unfounded. Glenn did have a major redevelopment project in Harlem that legitimately demanded extra attention. Lucy was simply adjusting to New York City style. There was no reason for the faint whisper of discomfort that occasionally brushed Mercy's consciousness until the first incident. It happened on a Thursday. Mercy had a court appearance scheduled for the afternoon, but wrapped up earlier than expected when the opposing counsel requested a continuance. She texted Glenn that she'd be home early, but received no response, which wasn't unusual when he was in meetings. The house was quiet when she arrived, but she heard voices and soft laughter coming from the kitchen. Dropping her briefcase in the foyer, Mercy headed toward the sound, about to call out when something made her pause in the doorway. Glenn and Lucy stood by the island counter, a bottle of wine open between them, glasses half empty. That alone wasn't unusual. What froze Mercy was their posture and the unmistakable intimacy of the moment. Lucy stood unusually close to Glenn, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, her body angled toward him as she looked up with rapt attention. Glenn was leaning slightly toward her, one hand gesturing animatedly as he spoke, his expression more relaxed and engaged than Mercy had seen in weeks when he spoke to her. "I can't believe she actually said that to you," Lucy was saying, her voice warm with admiration. "You handled it perfectly, though." "Well, I had plenty of practice dealing with difficult personalities in college," Glenn replied with a grin. "Remember, What I told you about Professor Harris, the one who said you'd never amount to anything beyond your father's connections. Lucy's hand moved from his forearm to his shoulder in a gesture of support. If only he could see you now. The casual reference to a story Mercy hadn't heard, a personal anecdote Glenn had apparently shared with Lucy, but not his wife, felt like a small betrayal in itself. But it was Lucy's next words that truly twisted the knife. You know, that's what makes you and Mercy such different types of successful people, Lucy mused, taking a sip of wine. She's always had this clear path, academic validation, but you had to prove yourself against everyone's expectations. It takes a different kind of strength. Glenn nodded thoughtfully. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Mercy's always known exactly who she is and what she wanted. And you're still discovering all you can be, Lucy said softly, her eyes holding his with uncomfortable intensity. That's what makes you so... The moment Mercy entered, they both startled visibly, stepping apart with a quickness that suggested consciousness of impropriety. Lucy's hand dropped from Glenn's shoulder as if it burned, while Glenn straightened, abruptly wine sloshing in his glass. Mercy, Lucy's voice was an octave higher than usual. You're home early. Court appearance got postponed, Mercy replied, studying them both carefully. I texted. Sorry, phone's in my jacket, Glenn said, his casual tone at odds with the slight flush on his neck, a tell Mercy recognized from the rare occasions when he was uncomfortable. I got home early too. Lucy was telling me about this hilarious patient scenario from her clinical rotation. The lie was so smooth, so immediate, that Mercy felt momentarily disoriented. She had clearly heard them discussing Glenn's college experience, not Lucy's patients. The effortless shift in narrative made her question her own recollection for a split second. We opened that Bordeaux from your birthday, Lucy added quickly, gesturing to the bottle. I hope that was okay. Glenn said it wasn't being saved for anything special. Mercy's gaze shifted to the wine bottle, a vintage they had specifically set aside for their upcoming anniversary, a fact Glenn was well aware of. They had discussed it just last week when planning their celebration. Not at all, Mercy said, maintaining her composure, though her legal mind was cataloging every detail. The expensive wine they'd been saving, the unusual midday drinking, the physical proximity, the visible startling when she appeared, and most damning, the immediate lie about their conversation topic. Pour me a glass. The next hour passed in superficially normal conversation, but Mercy felt the undercurrent of tension. Glenn spoke too enthusiastically about his day. Lucy made excessive eye contact with Mercy, as if to prove she had nothing to hide, and both of them had subtle tells of nervousness. Glenn's finger tapping against his leg, Lucy's excessive hair touching. What was most unsettling was how seamlessly they recovered, transitioning into a discussion about a documentary series they'd all been watching, with Lucy carefully positioning herself as less informed, asking Mercy questions about elements she'd missed in previous episodes. The skillful redirection almost, but not quite, masked the awkwardness of the earlier moment. That night, as they prepared for bed, Mercy decided on directness. You and Lucy seemed quite comfortable this afternoon. Glenn, in the middle of hanging up his suit, paused almost imperceptibly before continuing the motion with deliberate casualness. Did we? Standing very close, drinking our anniversary wine, jumping apart when I walked in. Mercy kept her tone even, factual rather than accusatory. Glenn turned to face her, his expression a study in innocence that reminded Mercy uncomfortably of his courtroom face when deflecting difficult questions. We were just talking. Lucy had a rough day at her placement, got chewed out by her supervisor for connecting too deeply with a patient. I was being supportive. The explanation was entirely different from what he'd said in the kitchen, that Lucy had been telling him a hilarious patient scenario. The inconsistency hung in the air between them, though Glenn didn't seem to notice his own contradiction. by opening our anniversary wine at 3 in the afternoon. I didn't realize it was special, Glenn said, his tone taking on a slight defensive edge. It was just sitting in the rack, with a tag that said anniversary on it, Mercy pointed out. Glenn sighed, crossing to where she sat on the edge of the bed and kneeling before her. Mercy, are you seriously concerned about Lucy? She's your friend. We were just talking. Mercy studied his face, searching for signs of deception. Glenn had always been honest with her. It was the foundation of their relationship. But the discrepancies in his explanation were troubling. There's nothing happening. Absolutely nothing, Glenn replied, holding her gaze steadily. I promise. He took her hands in his thumb brushing over her wedding ring in a familiar, comforting gesture. Actually, I've been planning a surprise for our anniversary next month. That's why I was asking Lucy for ideas. She mentioned you guys used to talk about dream vacations at camp. The explanation was plausible, and Glenn's steady gaze betrayed no hint of deception. It would explain their startled reaction, being caught discussing anniversary plans, and even why they might open the special wine, getting in a celebratory mood while planning. It didn't quite align with the conversation Mercy had overheard, but perhaps that had been earlier, before they moved on to anniversary plans. Mercy felt her suspicions begin to dissolve, replaced by a twinge of guilt for doubting him. The truth was, Glenn had never given her reason to distrust him before. Since his playboy transformation in college, he had been unfailingly devoted and honest. Was she allowing the stress of her current caseload to make her paranoid? I'm sorry, she said finally. It's this case I'm working on, a corporate fraud where the CFO was embezzling for years while maintaining a perfect family man image. It's making me see deception everywhere. Glenn rose, pulling her up and into his arms. You have nothing to worry about, he murmured against her hair. You're the only woman I see. That night Glenn was particularly attentive, their lovemaking more passionate than it had been in weeks. As Mercy drifted towards sleep in his arms, she dismissed her earlier concerns as overreaction, a momentary lapse in the trust that had always been the cornerstone of their relationship. The incident faded as life resumed its busy routine. Mercy threw herself into preparation for a major class action suit, while Glenn announced he would be spearheading a new development initiative in Harlem. Their schedules grew increasingly hectic, ships passing in the night more often than not. Lucy, meanwhile, settled more deeply into their lives. She cooked elaborate dinners on nights when both Mercy and Glenn returned late, tidied the house despite their protests that she was a guest, and became a surprisingly comfortable presence in their home. Her continued apartment search seemed to yield no results, though she now mentioned it less frequently. 2 weeks after the kitchen incident, Glenn surprised Mercy with an elaborate anniversary weekend in the Berkshires, a charming bed and breakfast, hiking along autumn trails, and dinner at an exclusive restaurant where he presented her with a sapphire necklace that perfectly matched her eyes. To match the blue fire I fell in love with, he said, fastening it around her neck, the intensity that saw through all my bullshit from day one. The weekend rekindled their connection, reminding Mercy why she had fallen in love with Glenn in the first place: his attentiveness, his intelligence beneath the charm, his ability to make her feel simultaneously cherished and challenged. When they returned home, Lucy greeted them with freshly baked cookies and eager questions about their trip. She exclaimed appropriately over the necklace, noting how perfectly it suited Mercy. Everything seemed to have returned to comfortable normalcy, until Mercy found the texts. She hadn't meant to snoop. Glenn had left his phone on the bathroom counter while showering, and when it chimed repeatedly, Mercy glanced at it out of habit, expecting work messages. Instead, she saw Lucy's name with a series of heart emojis beside it, and the preview of a message that simply read, "Miss our talks already. Can't wait for Tom." The message cut off there in the preview. Before Mercy could process what she was seeing, the phone chimed again with another text from Lucy. That little cafe was perfect. Same time next week? Mercy stared at the screen, her mind racing. Cafe? What cafe? Glenn hadn't mentioned meeting Lucy anywhere outside of their morning carpools to Columbia. The shower shut off, and Mercy quickly set the phone down exactly as she'd found it, retreating to the bedroom with her heart pounding. When Glenn emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, Mercy was sitting on the edge of the bed, her expression carefully neutral. Your phone kept chiming, she said. Sounded important. Glenn picked up his phone, glancing at the screen. A micro-expression, so brief Mercy almost missed it, flashed across his face. Concern. Guilt. It was gone too quickly to identify. Just, Lucy asking about a psychology book I mentioned, he said, setting the phone face down on the dresser. Nothing urgent. The casual dismissal of what Mercy had clearly seen sent a chill through her. Glenn had never lied to her before, at least not that she had caught. Their relationship had been built on a foundation of honesty, even when it was difficult. As the bathroom door closed behind Glenn, Mercy sat motionless, processing what had just happened. The first crack in their marriage's foundation had appeared, a hairline fracture that threatened the integrity of everything they had built together, and Lucy Groves, it seemed, was the chisel. Chapter 8. Mounting Suspicions. The weeks following, the text message incident settled into an uneasy peace. On the surface, life in the Sutherland household maintained its normal rhythm, but beneath this veneer, subtle changes accumulated like snowflakes before an avalanche. Glenn's late nights became more frequent, his affectionate gestures toward Mercy grew more performative, and Lucy seemed to occupy more space in their home, expanding from grateful guest to established fixture. Mercy began keeping a mental log of inconsistencies. Glenn mentioning lunch at a restaurant where a colleague later referenced seeing him with a blonde woman. Lucy's detailed knowledge of Glenn's workday before Mercy heard the details herself. Inside jokes between them that required explanation. Each instance could be explained away, but the pattern was becoming harder to dismiss. The second troubling incident occurred 6 weeks after the text messages on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Mercy had been reviewing depositions since dawn. When she finally emerged from the home office, bleary-eyed and caffeine-depleted, she found Glenn and Lucy huddled on the couch, his laptop open between them, their heads bent close together, her hand resting on his forearm. This neighborhood demographic would be perfect for the community garden concept, Lucy was saying with enthusiasm. Look at the age distribution. Young families and retirees, both groups that studies show benefit most from communal green spaces. Glenn nodded, making notes on his document. Good insight. The board's been resistant to allocating funds for non-revenue elements, but this data might convince them. They were so absorbed that neither noticed Mercy in the doorway, observing their intimate interaction. The scene itself was innocent enough, two people discussing work, but their body language sent a familiar chill through Mercy. Finding solutions to Glenn's development challenges? She asked, stepping into the room. Both heads snapped up, and though they didn't physically jump apart, Mercy didn't miss how Lucy's hand slid from Glenn's arm, or how Glenn shifted to increase the space between them. Mercy! Lucy's smile was bright, but her cheeks flushed. I didn't hear you come in. Glenn was showing me the Harlem project plans. I hope that's okay. My thesis focuses on community psychology, and his development model is exactly what I've been researching. Of course it's okay, Mercy replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite the uncomfortable tightening in her chest. Glenn's work is impressive. I'm not surprised you're interested. As their conversation shifted to safer topics, Mercy observed the appreciative glance Glenn gave Lucy's retreating form when she left the room. So quick it might have been nothing, but so reminiscent of the old Glenn, the campus player who had evaluated every attractive woman who crossed his path. That evening, when Lucy announced she was meeting classmates for dinner, Mercy seized the opportunity for a direct conversation with her husband. "Glenn," she began as they washed dishes together, "I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty." Glenn's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Always. Is something developing between you and Lucy?" His reaction was immediate, a flash of indignation. "Are you serious right now? We've already had this conversation twice. I know, and I want to believe there's nothing but..." Mercy carefully placed a dried plate in the cabinet. "Your body language changes when she's around. You're working late more often. You're sharing your projects with her instead of bouncing ideas off me like you used to." "Mercy, you've been swamped with this case for weeks. Every time I try to discuss work with you, you're distracted or exhausted. Lucy happened to be available and interested. That's all." He took her hands, his expression earnest. "You're seeing threats where none exist." Put that way, Mercy's concerns again seemed overblown. She had noticed Lucy's tactile nature with others, touching Mercy's arm when they spoke, hugging the neighbors, children, greeting the barista with a warm hand clasp. That night, Glenn was particularly attentive, making love to her with an intensity that temporarily banished her concerns. As they lay together afterward, he propped himself on one elbow, tracing her features with gentle fingers. "We should take a vacation when your case wraps up," he suggested. "Just the two of us. Maybe that villa in Tuscany we've been talking about?" The gesture was so perfectly Glenn that Mercy felt a flush of shame for her suspicions. This was the man who had transformed himself for her, who had built a life with her based on mutual respect. How could she doubt him based on a few ambiguous interactions? Yet that night, after Glenn fell asleep, Mercy lay awake, replaying the conversations and encounters of the past few months. The text messages about meetings at cafes, Glenn's changing work schedule, Lucy's growing integration into their lives. Mercy made a decision. If she was wrong, no harm would be done. But if her suspicions had merit, she needed to know. The next morning, she called an old law school classmate who had opened a private investigation firm. Elena Ramirez's office was deliberately understated. No flashy signage, just a small plaque beside a nondescript door in a converted warehouse. "This isn't about opposing counsel, is it?" Elena asked after they exchanged greetings. "No," Mercy admitted. "It's personal." For the next hour, Mercy outlined the situation. Lucy's arrival, the changes in Glenn's behavior, the specific incidents that had triggered her concern. Elena listened without judgment, taking occasional notes. "So to be clear," Elena summarized, "you want surveillance on both your husband and this house guest, documenting their interactions when you're not present." "Yes," Mercy confirmed, the word feeling like a betrayal even as she spoke it. "I need to know if I'm being paranoid or if something is actually happening." "You're not the first spouse to sit in that chair," Elena assured her. "And in my experience, someone with your legal training doesn't imagine patterns that aren't there." For the next 2 weeks, as Mercy immersed herself in her case, a troubling pattern emerged in Elena's reports. Photos documented Glenn and Lucy meeting at cafes during times Glenn had claimed to be in meetings. GPS tracking showed unexplained detours. Transcripts of their public conversations revealed a growing intimacy they were deliberately concealing. None of it was explicitly damning, no passionate embraces or declarations of love, but the evidence painted a picture of two people developing a connection they were hiding. The third incident, the one that shattered any remaining doubt, occurred on a Wednesday evening, 3 days before Mercy's case was set for closing arguments. She had left the office early with a migraine, declining Glenn's offer to come home since he was in a crucial meeting with investors. The house was quiet when she arrived, and she headed straight upstairs, taking medication before lying down in the darkened bedroom. She must have dozed, because she woke disoriented to the sound of the front door opening and voices below. The migraine had receded to a dull throb, allowing her to register Glenn's voice and then Lucy's laugh. "I didn't expect Mercy to be home," Glenn was saying. "She texted about a migraine but said she was staying at the office until the medication kicked in." "Poor thing," Lucy replied with sympathy. "Those migraines of hers have been getting worse with this case stress." There was a pause, and then Glenn's voice, lower but clearly audible. "I miss you when we have to pretend. It's exhausting keeping this distance when she's around." Mercy froze, the blood in her veins turning to ice. "I know," Lucy responded, her voice hushed. "It's getting harder to hide how I feel about you, but we need to be patient. Everything will work out if we stick to the plan." "Maybe we should just tell her," Glenn said uncertainly. "This deception doesn't feel right." "Not yet," Lucy urged, her voice taking on a subtle edge beneath the softness. "Mercy's in the middle of this huge case. It would destroy her." We agreed. "To wait until after, remember? To minimize the damage." "You're right," Glenn sighed. "As always, I just hate lying to her. After everything we've been through." "It's kinder this way," Lucy assured him. "A clean break once all the pieces are in place. Soon we won't have to hide anymore." Their voices moved toward the kitchen, becoming indistinct. Mercy lay absolutely still, her legal mind analyzing what she'd just heard with clinical precision, despite the emotional tsunami gathering force within her. There was no innocent explanation this time. Forcing herself to breathe, slowly Mercy considered her options. The lawyer in her won out. "Never show your hand until you have all the facts." Moving silently, Mercy checked her appearance in the bathroom mirror, arranged her features into a mask of lingering discomfort, and made her way downstairs. The conversation in the kitchen immediately shifted as she appeared, Glenn and Lucy now discussing a documentary series with deliberate casualness. "You're up," Glenn said, crossing to kiss her forehead with perfect husbandly concern. "How's the migraine?" "Better," Mercy replied, studying his face for signs of the deception she now knew was there. "Not gone, but manageable." "I was just making some chamomile tea," Lucy said, her smile warm and seemingly genuine. "It might help." Mercy accepted the tea, noting how Lucy's hands were perfectly steady, her expression revealing nothing but friendly concern. Glenn, too, showed no signs of the conversation she'd overheard. No guilty fidgeting, no avoidance of eye contact, nothing that would betray that moments earlier he had been discussing their plan to leave her. They were good, Mercy realized with a chill. Very good. How long had this been going on? How many interactions had she misinterpreted, giving them the benefit of the doubt when her instincts had been screaming that something was wrong? That night, she sent a brief, encrypted message to Elena. "Need comprehensive package. No time constraints, no expense limitations." The response came within minutes. "Understood. Full surveillance and background beginning immediately. Daily reports." As she lay beside Glenn in the dark, listening to his steady breathing and wondering how the man she had loved and trusted for 7 years could lie so effortlessly to her face, Mercy felt something crystallize within her. The Glenn Sutherland she had married valued honesty above all else. He had built his entire reformed identity on being a man of integrity rather than charm. Had that all been an illusion? Another performance from a skilled player who had simply found a more sophisticated game. And Lucy, what was her role in this? A convenient affair partner or something more calculated? One certainty crystallized. She would not confront them yet. First, she would gather evidence, build a case as meticulously as she did in court. And when she finally confronted them, it would be with incontrovertible proof that would shatter their carefully constructed deception. Glenn stirred beside her, his arm automatically reaching for her in sleep. Mercy remained perfectly still, no longer finding comfort in the familiar weight of his embrace. Instead, she began to plan her next steps with the calculated precision that had made her one of New York's most formidable attorneys. Whatever was happening between Glenn and Lucy, Mercy would uncover the full truth. And when she did, they would discover they had severely underestimated the woman they were betraying. Chapter 9. The Birthday Betrayal. As her 34th birthday approached, Mercy found herself living a carefully choreographed double life. On the surface, she maintained the appearance of a successful attorney and trusting wife, carrying on normal conversations with both Glenn and Lucy, participating in household routines and continuing her professional responsibilities with her customary excellence. Beneath this facade, however, she had become a meticulous investigator of her own marriage. The comprehensive surveillance package from Ramirez Investigations delivered daily reports to her secure email account. Photographs of Glenn and Lucy meeting at cafes far from their usual haunts. Transcripts of conversations in public places, captured by directional microphones. Timestamps of arrivals and departures that contradicted the explanations they gave Mercy. The evidence was devastating in its comprehensiveness. What had begun as casual flirtation during their morning drives had evolved into a full-blown affair, conducted during supposed late meetings and fabricated study groups. They were careful, meeting in obscure locations, maintaining appropriate behavior in public. But Elena's team was better, documenting brief touches in quiet corners, intimate conversations over coffee, and the unmistakable body language of two people romantically involved. Most painful were the recorded conversations where Glenn spoke about Mercy, describing her as brilliant but cold, suggesting she was more devoted to her career than their marriage, painting himself as a supportive husband whose needs had been neglected. It was a portrait Mercy barely recognized, a convenient rewriting of their relationship that allowed Glenn to justify his betrayal. "She's always been like this," Glenn had told Lucy during one documented conversation at a small cafe in the village. "Focused on the next achievement, the next case. I thought it would change after we got established, but it's only gotten more intense." "You deserve someone who puts you first," Lucy had replied, her hand covering his on the table. "Someone who appreciates everything you offer." The conversation had made Mercy physically ill when she first read the transcript. Had Glenn truly felt neglected all these years? Or was this revisionist history to absolve himself of guilt? The Glenn she knew had always encouraged her career, had taken pride in her accomplishments, had never once suggested he felt sidelined by her ambition. More shocking were the revelations about Lucy herself. Elena's background investigation had uncovered a pattern. Lucy Groves had a history of inserting herself into the lives of wealthy married men, creating dependency and intimacy before the relationship turned romantic. Two similar situations in Auckland and Sydney had ended with substantial financial settlements when the wives discovered the affairs. The vulnerable graduate student act, it seemed, was a well-rehearsed performance. Lucy had never been accepted to Columbia's psychology program. She had applied but been rejected, a fact she had concealed with remarkable skill, leaving the house each day as if attending classes. Instead, Elena's team had tracked her to various cafes where she spent hours on her laptop, occasionally meeting with Glenn, but often simply maintaining her elaborate fiction. The depth of the deception was breathtaking. Lucy had created an entirely fictional life, complete with fabricated stories about professors and classmates. Glenn, apparently, had never bothered to verify any of it, accepting her narrative without question. As the pieces came together, Mercy found herself less devastated than coldly, precisely furious. The emotional breakdown she had initially feared never materialized. Instead, a steely resolve took its place. a determination to understand the full scope of their betrayal before deciding how to respond. Despite the mountain of evidence accumulating in her secure email, Mercy maintained her composed exterior. She won her court case with a unanimous verdict that made headlines in legal circles. She attended a charity gala on Glenn's arm, smiling for photographs and making appropriate small talk. She even helped Lucy prepare for a fictitious presentation. At Columbia, reviewing her slides and offering constructive feedback, all while knowing the presentation would never occur. "You're an absolute lifesaver," Lucy had gushed, embracing Mercy with seemingly genuine affection. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The irony was almost unbearable. As her birthday drew closer, Mercy noticed Glenn and Lucy engaged in frequent whispered conversations that abruptly changed topic when she entered the room. Glenn was spending more time on his phone, smiling at messages and stepping away to take calls. Lucy had begun asking oddly specific questions about Mercy's preferences and memories. Most telling was the receipt Mercy found while organizing their tax documents. A Cartier purchase for a diamond bracelet valued at $18,500. The bracelet hadn't appeared among her gifts, nor had Glenn mentioned such an extravagant purchase. Elena's team confirmed through a source at the jeweler that the bracelet had been engraved with a message, "For my new beginning, G." The final confirmation came 3 days before her birthday, when Elena delivered photographic evidence of Glenn leasing a private terrace at the Peninsula Hotel for the evening of Mercy's birthday, along with a reservation for 2 at a different restaurant later that same night, a reservation made in Glenn's name with no mention of Mercy. "They're planning something significant on your birthday," Eleanor said during their brief meeting in a secluded corner of Bryant Park. "The timing can't be coincidental." "The ultimate insult," Mercy replied, her voice steady despite the cold fury settling in her chest. "Using my birthday celebration as cover for their own milestone." Eleanor hesitated, then added the details she'd been withholding. "Our source at the hotel confirmed Glenn requested champagne and roses for a special proposal. The staff assumed it was a vow renewal for you." The word proposal landed like a physical blow, momentarily stealing Mercy's breath. Not just an affair, then. A future, plans, commitments. The betrayal was more complete than she had imagined. "Are you sure you want to wait?" Elena asked, concern evident in her professional demeanor. "We have more than enough evidence already." Mercy considered the question carefully. The lawyer in her had built an airtight case: financial records, witness statements, photographic evidence, recorded conversations. She could confront them now, end the charade immediately. But something deeper, more primal, demanded a different kind of justice. The symbolism was too perfect to ignore. Glenn planning to propose to her friend on her birthday, using the celebration he had arranged for her as cover. The audacity, the sheer disrespect of it, demanded a response equally symbolic. "I'm sure," Mercy said finally. "Let them complete their performance. I'll conclude it with my own." The night before her birthday, Glenn prepared a special dinner at home, recreating the meal from their first official date in college. He opened an expensive bottle of wine, toasted her success in the recent case, and presented her with an early gift, a first edition of her favorite novel that he must have sourced months ago. "Just a prelude to tomorrow," he said, his eyes warm, as he refilled her wine glass. "I've been planning something special for weeks." "Have you now?" Mercy kept her tone light, curious how far he would take this performance. "You work so hard, give so much to everyone else," Glenn continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You deserve to be celebrated properly." Looking into his eyes, the same eyes that had promised fidelity on their wedding day, same lips that now kissed another woman, Mercy felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing the scene from a distance. This man, whom she had loved completely for 7 years, had become a stranger wearing her husband's familiar face. "There's something about birthdays," she said carefully. "They make you reflect on where you've been and where you're going. What's real and what's just performance?" Something flickered in Glenn's expression, a momentary uncertainty before his charming smile returned. "Deep thoughts for a birthday eve," he teased. "Save the existential reflections for tomorrow. Tonight is just about us." Later, when he made love to her with particular tenderness, Mercy maintained her responsive facade, while her mind catalogued each caress as evidence. The same hands that touched Lucy now touching her, the same lips forming loving words with practiced ease, regardless of their truth. The intimacy, once her sanctuary, had become another violation. After Glenn fell asleep, Mercy slipped from bed and checked her secured email one final time. Elena's latest report confirmed the detailed arrangements for the following evening. Glenn had reserved the rooftop restaurant at the Peninsula Hotel for 7 o'clock, an elaborate surprise birthday celebration with their closest friends and family invited. Lucy would arrive separately, ostensibly as another guest. At precisely 9:30, Glenn had arranged for Mercy to be called away by the hotel staff for a special birthday message, creating a window during which he would escort Lucy to the private East Terrace, where flowers, champagne, and the diamond bracelet awaited. The plan was detailed, calculated, and extraordinarily callous, using Mercy's birthday celebration as the backdrop for his romantic milestone with her friend. The coldness of it, the deliberate layering of insult upon betrayal, crystallized her resolve. Her response would be equally methodical. The morning of her birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect October day with crisp air and golden sunlight filtering through autumn leaves. Glenn was particularly attentive, serving breakfast in bed and presenting her with flowers before heading to work with a secretive smile and promises for a special evening. "Wear that blue dress I love," he suggested, kissing her goodbye. "And don't make any dinner plans. I'm kidnapping you at 6. Lucy, too, was effusive in her birthday wishes, presenting Mercy with a handmade card and small gift, a delicate bracelet that, given what Mercy now knew, seemed a particularly twisted choice. "I've got a study group all afternoon," Lucy said, gathering her books with unusual haste. "But I'll see you tonight, right?" "Oh, you'll definitely see me tonight," Mercy replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. Once alone, Mercy moved with decisive purpose. First, she contacted Elena, confirming the final arrangements they had put in place. Next, she called her mother, having a brief but important conversation that ended with her mother's worried promise to trust her judgment. Finally, she opened her laptop and systematically transferred funds from their joint accounts to separate ones she had established weeks earlier. Not everything, but enough to ensure her immediate financial security. She spent the afternoon preparing, methodically, not just her appearance, but the evidence she would present and the precise strategy of her response. The lawyer in her appreciated the symmetry. Glenn had planned his betrayal with careful attention to detail. Her response would be equally thorough. At 5:30, she dressed carefully in the blue dress Glenn had requested, applied her makeup with precision, and arranged her hair in the elegant updo he particularly admired. Standing before the mirror, Mercy hardly recognized herself, not because of her appearance, which was flawless as always, but because of the woman behind the reflection. The trusting, open-hearted person she had been seemed like a distant memory. In her place stood someone hardened by betrayal, someone whose faith in love had been systematically destroyed by the two people she had welcomed most completely into her life. But unlike so many others who had faced similar betrayals, Mercy was not broken, she was transformed. Her legal mind and strategic thinking now turned toward a personal justice as precise and devastating as any courtroom victory. Glenn arrived precisely at 6, dressed in a tailored suit and wearing the delighted expression of a man with perfectly orchestrated surprises in store. "You look stunning," he said, his appreciation appearing genuine as he helped her into her coat. "Ready for your birthday adventure?" "More than ready," Mercy replied, maintaining her facade for these final hours. In the car, Glenn kept up a stream of light-hearted conversation, occasionally reaching for her hand or glancing at her with what seemed like genuine affection. If Mercy hadn't seen the evidence with her own eyes, hadn't heard the recordings of him with Lucy, she might have believed this performance. The devoted husband, eager to celebrate his beloved wife. They arrived at the peninsula, where the doorman greeted them by name and directed them to the private elevator that would take them to the rooftop restaurant. As they ascended, Glenn squeezed her hand, his excitement appearing unfeigned. "I hope you're ready for this," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation. "I've been preparing for weeks," Mercy replied truthfully. The elevator doors opened to darkness, then suddenly lights flooded the space and voices shouted, "Surprise!" The rooftop had been transformed into an elegant party space, with flowers matching their wedding colors and photographs of their life, together displayed on elegant easels around the perimeter. Dozens of friends and family members beamed at them, her colleagues from the firm, Glenn's business associates, their mutual friends, and both their families. "Happy birthday, darling," Glenn said, kissing her cheek for the benefit of their audience. For the next hour, Mercy moved through the party with practiced social grace, accepting birthday wishes, laughing at appropriate moments, thanking everyone for coming. All the while, her eyes tracked Glenn and Lucy, who had arrived separately and were maintaining a careful distance from each other in public, though Mercy didn't miss their brief exchanges and meaningful glances across the room. She also noted the subtle positioning of Elena's associates among the serving staff and hotel personnel, their discreet cameras and recording devices ready to document what was to come. As the evening progressed, she noted Glenn becoming increasingly distracted, checking his watch and scanning the room. Lucy, too, seemed to be waiting for something, her normally animated conversation with other guests more subdued as she repeatedly glanced toward the doors leading to the private terrace that overlooked the city. At precisely 9:25, a hotel staff member, actually one of Elena's team, approached Mercy with professional deference. "Mrs. Sutherland, there's a special birthday message waiting for you in the manager's office, if you'll follow me." Mercy nodded, allowing herself to be led away from the main party. Once out of sight, she dismissed the pretense. "Is everything ready?" "All in place," the woman confirmed. "Mr. Sutherland just signaled to Ms. Groves. They're heading to the East Terrace now." Mercy checked her appearance one final time in a decorative mirror, straightening her shoulders and taking a steady breath. Then it's time. She walked deliberately toward the terrace doors, her heartbeat remarkably steady despite the confrontation she knew awaited. Through the glass, she could make out two figures in the soft lighting, Glenn kneeling before Lucy, who was extending her wrist as he fastened something around it. The diamond bracelet, no doubt, his token of commitment to their new beginning. As Mercy pushed open the door, she saw Glenn rise to his feet, pulling Lucy into an embrace that quickly became a passionate kiss. The city lights sparkled behind them, creating a romantic backdrop for their moment. "Soon, we'll tell her everything," Glenn was saying as he broke the kiss, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "The bracelet is just the beginning. Once we're established together, happy birthday to me," Mercy said, her voice cutting through their intimate moment like a blade of ice. They sprang apart, their expressions a study in shock and horror as they realized who stood watching them. The diamond bracelet on Lucy's wrist caught the light, sparkling obscenely in the romantic terrace lighting that Glenn had undoubtedly arranged for this moment. For a suspended second, no one moved. Then, with deliberate calmness, Mercy crossed to the small bar cart on the terrace, picked up a flute of champagne, and walked toward them. Glenn's face had drained of color, while Lucy had the wide-eyed panic of prey, realizing it's been caught in a trap. "Mercy," Glenn began, his voice strangled. "This isn't—" The champagne hit him full in the face before he could complete the lie, liquid dripping down his expensive suit as he sputtered in shock. Before either of them could react further, Mercy delivered two precise, ringing slaps, first to Glenn's face, then to Lucy's, the sound sharp and final in the night air. "I trusted you with everything I had," Mercy said, her voice deadly calm despite the storm of emotions beneath. "I'm not the weak, naive woman you clearly think I am." She turned slightly, and only then did they notice the terrace doors had remained open. Standing in the threshold were several party guests who had been discreetly directed there by Eleanor's team: Glenn's parents, Mercy's mother, two senior partners from their respective firms, and several close friends. Their expressions ranged from confusion to dawning horror as they processed the scene before them. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to our guests the significance of that bracelet, Glenn, or why you're kissing my friend on my birthday." Mercy's voice remained steady, her composure unbroken. "Or maybe you'd prefer I share the evidence I've been gathering for weeks." Glenn took a halting step forward, his hand outstretched. "Mercy, please, we can discuss this privately. Like you've been privately discussing your future plans, your new beginning." She withdrew a folded paper from her clutch. "Would that be the beginning you've been financing with funds diverted from our joint accounts? Or the beginning you've been planning in those lengthy business meetings that curiously never appear in your firm's calendar?" Lucy finally found her voice, though it wavered uncertainly. "Mercy, you don't understand. We never meant to hurt." "You save the performance, Lucy. Or should I say Lucille Andrews, since that's the name you used in Sydney with the Prestons and in Auckland with the Whitfields." Mercy's gaze was cutting. "Your pattern is quite consistent. Befriend a wealthy couple, seduce the husband, extract financial support. Though I'll admit, engraving for my new beginning on the bracelet is a new touch." Lucy paled visibly, her carefully crafted persona crumbling as her past was exposed. "That's not... You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Mercy replied evenly. "Just as I know you were never accepted to Columbia, that you've been pretending to attend classes while actually meeting my husband in various locations across the city, and that you've been systematically manipulating both of us since the day you arrived." She turned back to Glenn, whose expression had shifted from shock to desperate calculation, his mind clearly racing for a way to contain the situation. "Don't bother formulating your defense, Glenn. I have photographs, recordings, financial records, and witness statements. I've been building this case for weeks. It's quite airtight." The lawyer in her couldn't help but appreciate the elegant demolition of their deception, the methodical dismantling of the lies they had constructed so carefully. There was professional satisfaction in watching them realize how completely they had been outmaneuvered. But beneath that cold precision, a deeper pain throbbed, the irrevocable loss of what she had believed their marriage to be. 7 years of shared history, of trust and partnership, revealed as partially illusory. That wound would take longer to process than the anger and indignation that currently fueled her. "See you both in court," she said with deadly finality, turning away from their stricken faces. As she walked past the gathered witnesses, Mercy maintained her composure, back straight and head high. Only her mother received brief eye contact, a silent acknowledgement of the pain beneath the performance. The party had stilled as words spread through whispers and glances. Mercy moved through the suddenly awkward gathering with deliberate grace, pausing only to speak quietly with the lead server, another of Elena's team. "Execute Plan B," she instructed, "and make sure everyone receives the evidence packets on their way out. As she stepped into the elevator alone, Mercy finally allowed herself a moment of genuine emotion, not collapse or breakdown, but a deep breath of liberation. The weight of suspicion and pretense lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the clarifying anger of a woman who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. The doors closed on the chaos she had left behind, Glenn and Lucy facing the public humiliation of their exposed affair, the carefully selected witnesses ensuring the story would spread through their professional and social circles within hours, the evidence packets that would be distributed to key individuals, guaranteeing that neither of them could spin a more flattering narrative. Her birthday celebration had indeed become a milestone, though not the one Glenn had planned. For him, it marked the beginning of consequences. For Mercy, it was the first day of reclaiming her life from betrayal, not as a victim, but as the architect of her own justice. Chapter 10. The Devastating Revenge. The morning after the birthday disaster, Glenn Sutherland awoke in a hotel room with a pounding headache and 46 missed calls on his phone. The events of the previous night played in his mind like a nightmare. Mercy's appearance on the terrace, the public humiliation, the cold fury in her eyes before she walked away. Lucy had disappeared in the chaos, not answering his frantic texts or calls. Glenn's delusion that he could fix the situation shattered the moment he arrived at their brownstone. The locks had been changed. A security guard informed him that he was not permitted on the premises and handed him a sealed envelope containing a temporary restraining order. "This is my house," Glenn protested, his voice rising. "Actually, sir, according to the deed I've been provided, this property is solely in Ms. Christian's name. A gift from Richard and Elizabeth Sutherland to both of you, but legally registered only to her." Stunned, Glenn retreated to his car, tearing open the envelope. Inside, he found not only the restraining order, but a preliminary divorce filing that outlined his infidelity in clinical detail, including dates, times, and locations of his meetings with Lucy. Information that could only have come from professional surveillance. Attached was a forensic accounting of funds he had secretly set aside for his planned future with Lucy, along with transcripts of conversations he had believed were completely private. The final page was a handwritten note in Mercy's precise script. "Glenn, you thought I was oblivious. You thought I was weak. That was your first mistake. Your second was forgetting that I build cases for a living. Your third was underestimating exactly how thoroughly I would destroy you when I discovered your betrayal. This is just the beginning. Mercy." As Yvonne Q, his phone rang, his father's private line. "Dad, I can explain." "Save it," Richard Sutherland's voice cut like steel. "I've just spent an hour with Mercy and her attorneys. The board meeting is at noon. You have until then to decide if you'll resign voluntarily or be removed. Either way, your access to all company accounts and properties has been suspended." "What? You can't?" "I can, and I have. Not only have you made a fool of yourself personally, but you've put the company at risk with your financial maneuvers. Did you really think shifting development funds through offshore accounts would go unnoticed? How did she? Apparently your wife has been documenting your creative accounting for months. She simply chose not to reveal it until now." The call ended abruptly. Glenn tried calling Lucy, only to discover her number had been disconnected. At noon, Glenn walked into Sutherland Development's conference room. The silence that greeted him was his first clue that the situation was beyond redemption. The second was the presence of Mercy herself, sitting calmly beside his father at the head of the table. For the next 30 minutes, Mercy laid out a comprehensive case against him, not just personal indiscretions, but professional ones. She presented evidence of his misrepresentation of community support for the Harlem Project, his manipulation of environmental impact data, and his diversion of funds designated for community benefits. As you can see, she concluded, addressing the board rather than him. These actions expose Sutherland Developments to significant legal and reputational risk. I've prepared a mitigation strategy, but it requires Mr. Sutherland's complete separation from the company. The vote was unanimous. Glenn watched in numb disbelief as his professional life was systematically dismantled, culminating in his father personally demanding his company identification and electronic devices. "Why are you doing this?" Glenn finally asked Mercy. Desperation cracking his voice. Mercy regarded him with clinical detachment. "This isn't destruction, Glenn. It's consequences. For the first time in your life, you're experiencing the natural results of your actions without charm or privilege to shield you." His father stood, straightening his tie. "Your mother asked me to tell you not to call for a while," Richard said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "She needs time." "Dad, please," Glenn began, but Richard held up a hand. "You chose this, Glenn. Not just the affair, people make mistakes, but the systematic lying, the financial improprieties, the plans to abandon the company. Mercy showed me the airline reservations you made for yourself and that woman. One way, tickets to Paris scheduled for next month. Were you even going to say goodbye?" The evidence kept mounting, each revelation making Glenn's position more indefensible. He had believed himself so clever, covering his tracks, compartmentalizing his dual life. Now he realized he had severely underestimated the woman he had married, a woman who apparently had been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. Over the next week, Glenn lost far more than his marriage and job. His credit cards had been frozen, his club membership suspended, and his reputation in New York social and business circles utterly destroyed. The evidence packets Mercy had distributed to key individuals in their network had spread through their social circle with devastating efficiency. Most brutal was the email from his brother. "You were the one person I thought would never sell out. Turns out you're actually worse than Dad. At least he's honest about his priorities." 2 weeks after being removed from Sutherland Developments, Glenn learned the Harlem Project was proceeding under new leadership, with Mercy named as Special Advisor to the Board on Community Integration. His father had not only removed him, but replaced him with his wife. On day 16, Glenn finally tracked down Lucy. They met at a nondescript coffee shop in Queens. The woman who slid into the booth across from him bore little resemblance to the warm, vivacious Lucy he had fallen for. This version was tense, her eyes constantly darting toward the door. "We need to coordinate our response," Glenn began without preamble. "Mercy has systematically destroyed my life, but together we can—" "There is no together, Glenn," Lucy interrupted, her New Zealand accent suddenly less pronounced. "It's over." "What are you talking about? We had plans. The Paris tickets are worthless now." Lucy leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Your wife didn't just gather evidence on your affair. She built a complete profile on me. My history, my previous relationships, everything. I'm leaving for Australia tonight. You're abandoning me after everything I've sacrificed?" Glenn couldn't believe what he was hearing. Lucy's expression hardened. "You sacrificed nothing. You thought you could have everything, your marriage, your position, your reputation, and me on the side until it was convenient to leave. That's not sacrifice, Glenn. That's entitlement." With that, Lucy walked out of the coffee shop and out of his life, leaving Glenn to face the wreckage alone. The final blow came 3 months later. Having scraped by on increasingly limited resources, Glenn had secured a modest position with a former colleague's development firm in New Jersey. On his 3rd day, his new employer called him into the office. "I'm sorry, Glenn, but we have to let you go." The man slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a detailed background report prepared by a prominent risk management firm, outlining Glenn's professional transgressions at Sutherland Developments. Attached was a personal note on Mercy's law firm letterhead. This information is being provided as a professional courtesy to ensure informed hiring decisions. We can't risk the liability, his employer said apologetically. Every development company in the tri-state area has received this report. Glenn had been blacklisted, not through whispered rumors or vague warnings, but with documented evidence of his own misdeeds, systematically distributed to ensure he could never rebuild his career in the industry he had once dominated. 6 months. To the day after his betrayal had been exposed, a final FedEx envelope arrived at Glenn's dingy studio apartment in Queens, where he now worked remotely as a low-level data analyst. Inside was his final divorce decree, along with a USB drive containing a video file. The video showed Mercy in her law firm office, looking directly at the camera. "Hello, Glenn," she began, her voice steady. "By now you've experienced the consequences of your choices. I wanted you to understand this wasn't simply revenge, though I won't deny that element exists." She leaned forward slightly. "What you're experiencing is accountability, the natural result of betrayal, deception, and ethical failures. I simply removed the buffers of privilege and charm that have protected you from consequences your entire life. You betrayed more than our marriage vows, Glenn. You betrayed the fundamental trust that made our relationship possible. You betrayed the man I believed you had become, and for that, I needed you to experience a loss as complete as the one you inflicted on me." The video ended there, no goodbye, no closing remarks. Just Mercy's clear-eyed assessment of what she had done and why. That evening, Glenn stood outside Mercy's law firm in the rain, hoping for some last chance at redemption. He waited for hours until finally the lobby doors opened and Mercy emerged. She wasn't alone. Glenn's father walked beside her, along with 2 board members he recognized. They were laughing, clearly celebrating some success, Mercy's expression more animated and confident than ever. She was thriving. The realization hit Glenn with physical force. While his life had been systematically dismantled, Mercy had flourished. Professionally, socially, perhaps even personally. She had not just survived their marriage's destruction, she had transformed it into fuel for her own ascension. Before he could approach, Mercy noticed him standing pathetically on the rain-soaked sidewalk. Without breaking stride, she reached into her briefcase and handed something to a junior associate who delivered an envelope to Glenn. Inside were photographs, Lucy with another distinguished-looking man in Australia. The message was clear. Lucy had moved on, finding another target for her particular talents. She had abandoned Glenn without a backward glance, just as he had planned to discard Mercy when it became convenient. When Glenn looked up, Mercy was still watching him, her expression not triumphant but simply resolved. "You thought I was weak," she called, her voice carrying to him and to those witnessing their encounter. "You thought I would break. That was your fatal mistake, Glenn. I was never the weak one. You were. Weak in character, weak in judgment, and now simply weak." With those words, she turned and continued toward the waiting car, his father, still her champion despite her divorce from his son, placing a proud arm around her shoulders. The tableau could not have been more clear. Mercy had not just survived Glenn's betrayal. She had replaced him in every arena that mattered to him. As the car pulled away, Glenn stood alone in the rain, finally understanding the full magnitude of his miscalculation. In underestimating the woman he had married, seeing only what he wanted to see rather than the formidable intelligence and strength that had been before him all along, he had not just lost his marriage, he had lost everything that defined him. While she had emerged stronger, more powerful, and completely beyond his reach. As he turned to walk away, the rain washing over him in sheets that matched his inner desolation, Glenn finally understood the most painful truth of all. Mercy hadn't destroyed him. She had simply removed her protection, exposing him to the natural consequences of his own choices. In the end, his destruction had been entirely self-inflicted. The inevitable result of a man who had never learned that true strength lay not in charm or manipulation, but in integrity and commitment. And that was a lesson he had learned far too late.